Sometimes your heart finds what it wants in the strangest spots. When we think we've got life all sorted out, luck has a way of proving us totally wrong. Eleanor Whitmore had everything cash could get in 1887 Colorado. A big house, nice clothes, and rich guys chasing her. But when she disappeared from her dad's place, no one thought they'd find her 3 days later in the arms of Silas Kane, a tough guy who lived by himself in the wild woods. The sight shocked everybody from the church women to the bar owners. Here was the area's most fancy young lady, snuggled up calmly with a wild loner who hadn't talked to anyone in years. What happened in those lost days that changed it all? Before we go back, tell us where you're listening from, and if this tale grabs you, be sure you're signed up because tomorrow I've got something super cool for you. The Whitmore place spread over 3,000 acres of top Colorado land, like a big sign of people's big dreams. From the porch that went all around the main house, you could see all the way to the big split in the land, where snowy mountaintops stood like church towers against the huge blue sky. Charles Whitmore had made his big business one train track at a time, and every part of his big house told about a guy who'd fought his way up from zero. On this one September morning in 1887, Eleanor Whitmore stood at her bedroom window watching the aspen leaves move in the cool mountain air. At 23, she had the kind of looks that made guys trip on their words, her hair that shone like shiny copper, green eyes that seemed to keep secrets, and a smile that could soften the toughest guy. But her look shad turned into her jail. "Miss Eleanor, your dad wants you in the library," called Martha, the main housekeeper who'd raised Eleanor since her mom's death 15 years ago. The older lady's voice showed the years of handling both the house and sad times. Eleanor sighed, her breath making the window foggy. She drew a heart in the fog, then fast wiped it off. Such kid stuff had no spot in the life of Colorado's top single lady. The library smelled of leather and pipe smoke, a guy spot where her dad did the work that kept their world going. Charles Whitmore sat behind his huge oak desk, his silver pocket watch, a sign of his love for being on time and making money, shining in the morning light. At 58, he was still a big-deal guy, his steel-gray beard cut with army neatness, his dark eyes smart with brains and drive. "Daughter," he said, without looking up from his letters, "we need to talk about your future." Eleanor sat in the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap like she'd been taught. "What about my future, Father?" "Bartholomew Morrison has asked for your hand in marriage. I've said yes for you." The words hit Eleanor like a real hit. Morrison, a guy whose money came from silver mines worked by guys who hardly saw their families, whose cold eyes had always made her skin feel creepy, whose name for being mean to his workers was whispered about in rooms across Colorado Springs. "Father, surely you can't mean it. Mr. Morrison is Mr. Morrison is one of the richest guys in the area," Charles cut in, his voice with the sound that had scared train bosses and leaders alike. "This match will keep our family safe for many years ahead." Eleanor's heart pounded against her chest. "But I don't love him. I hardly know him." Charles finally looked up, his face softening a bit. "Love is a treat, Eleanor. Safety is a must. Your mom got this when she married me." "Mother married you because she picked you." "This is not the same. Your mom married me because her dad set it up just as I am setting this up for you. Love came after in its own way." He shut his book with a final snap. "The engagement will be told at dinner tonight. Morrison will be with us." Eleanor felt the walls of the library getting closer around her. Through the tall windows, she could see the mountains calling her, big and wild and free. How many times had she dreamed of going into those peaks, of breathing air that didn't taste of rules and duties? "May I go now?" she asked softly. Charles nodded, already back to his papers. "Martha has got your green silk ready for tonight. It goes well with your eyes." Eleanor walked through the house she'd called home for 23 years. Seeing it now like for the first time. The wallpaper brought from France, the crystal light that cost more than most families made in 10 years, the picture of her mom, beautiful, sad Catherine Whitmore, who died when Eleanor was just 8 years old. She found herself in the kitchen where Martha was telling how to make what would be a big meal good for an engagement news. "Martha," Eleanor said softly, "tell me about the mountain man." The older woman's hand stopped over the bread dough she was kneading. "What mountain man, child?" "You know which one." "Silas Kane, the loner who lives up in the highland." Martha's face got worried. "What's made you think of this, Miss Eleanor? Please, I need to know." Martha sighed, her rough hands going back to their work. Silas Kane was a different guy once. Smart, they say, fought in the war, lost everything that mattered to him. Some say his family got killed while he was away fighting. Others say he did something bad and can't live with normal folks anymore. How bad? Nobody knows for sure. He's been up in those mountains for close to 12 years now. Comes to town maybe twice a year for stuff. Pays in gold. Doesn't talk to anyone unless he must. Doc Peterson says he's fixed Kane a few times for hurts. Always pays right, always nice. But there's a sadness in him deeper than any cut. Eleanor took in this news, her mind making pictures of a guy so hurt by life that he'd picked being alone over people. Do you think he's dangerous? Martha looked at Eleanor's face closely. I think he's a guy who wants to be left alone. Why are you asking about such stuff? Before Eleanor could answer, her dad's voice boomed from the dining room. Eleanor, our guests are coming. That evening, sitting across from Bartholomew Morrison at her dad's dining table, Eleanor felt like a thing on show. Morrison was 42 with thin brown hair and small, smart eyes that seemed to lister value-like stuff. His talk was all on his mining work and his plans for growing his stuff. Of course, once we are married, you'll want to stop any silly hobbies, Morrison said, cutting into his beef with Dr. Neatness. A wife's job is helping her husband's work, not doing her own fun stuff. Eleanor had been teaching reading to the kids of their ranch workers every Sunday after church. It was the only time she felt really helpful, really alive. I like teaching. The kids are kids should be learning jobs, not wasting time with books they'll never use, Morrison cut in. Too much learning makes people unhappy with their place in life. Charles nodded like he agreed. Bartholomew has very good ideas about how society works. Eleanor left early saying she had a headache that wasn't all fake. In her room, she stood again at her window, looking out at the moonlit peaks that seemed to shine with their own light. Somewhere up there, a guy lived free from the heavy weight of what people expect. Somewhere up there was a life where a person could breathe. She found herself thinking about her mom's journal hidden in the bottom drawer of her writing desk. Catherine Whitmore had written in it every day until she died, pouring out thoughts and feelings she could never say out loud. Eleanor had read every page, looking for hints about the woman who'd given her life. One part written just months before her death had always stuck with her. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been braver. If I'd followed my heart instead of my duty, would I have been happier? Would I have lived longer? I look at my daughter and pray she'll have the courage I never found. Eleanor pulled the journal from its hiding spot now, running her fingers over her mom's faded writing. Tomorrow night, she would be officially engaged to a guy who saw her as a thing. In 6 months, she would be his wife. In a year, she might be having his kid, stuck forever in a life that felt like slow no air. The mountains called to her through the window, promising freedom she'd never known and might never know again. But how could a protected girl survive even one night in that wild place? What did she know about anything past sitting rooms and dinner parties? As she got ready for bed, Eleanor's hand touched something stuck in her dressing table drawer. She pulled out a torn piece of silk ribbon from a dress she'd ripped weeks ago while walking too close to the rose bushes. The fabric was soft, fancy, ruined by one careless moment like her life would be if she didn't act soon. Outside her window, an owl called to its mate, a lonely sound that seemed to match the wanting in her heart. Tomorrow would bring another day of getting ready for a future she didn't want. But tonight, for just a few more hours, she could still dream of mountains and freedom and a life lived her own way. The silk ribbon lay across her palm like a promise or a warning. Sometimes the most pretty things were the most easy to break. Sometimes they had to break before they could become something stronger. The engagement ring came with the morning mail in a velvet box that might as well have been a box for the dead. Eleanor stared at the big diamond with green stones around it. Beautiful, cold, and worth more than most folks would see ever. It was just the kind of ring Bartholomew Morrison would pick. Impressive, costly, and totally without warmth. It's great, Martha said softly, though Eleanor saw the worried look the older woman gave her. Eleanor lifted the ring from its soft spot, feeling its heaviness in her palm. Such a small thing to mean the end of all her dreams. Yes, she said quietly. Great. That evening, the Whitmore dining room shone with candlelight and glass. Charles had asked the Townstop families to see the official engagement news. Eleanor sat like a dressed-up doll in her green silk gown, the ring heavy on her finger, smiling until her face hurt. Morrison stood and lifted his glass, his thin lips bent in what looked like a smile. Friends, I'm proud to tell me engagement to Miss Eleanor Whitmore. She will make a good wife and mom once she's shown her jobs. The guests clapped nicely. Eleanor saw Mrs. Henderson from the store, whose nice eyes held sorry feelings rather than good wishes. The woman had 6 daughters of her own and got the heavy rules put on young women. Eleanor, Morrison went on, maybe you'd like to say something to our guests. All eyes looked at her. Eleanor stood slowly, her hands shaking a bit as she held the table edge. This was the moment, her last chance to say her truth before the cage door shut forever. As she started, then stopped. Morrison's eyes were cold, waiting for her to do as told. Her dad's face warned against any silly stuff. The room went quiet except for the ticking of the big clock in the corner. I'm thankful for Mr. Morrison's ask, she heard herself say, the words tasting like dirt in her mouth. More clapping, more good wishes, more chains around her soul. After the guests left, Eleanor sat in her room, still in the green gown, looking at her face in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, pretty, lucky, and totally stuck. The engagement ring caught the lamplight, sending rainbow bits dancing across the ceiling like tears. A soft knock stopped her thinking. Come in. Martha came in with a tea tray, her rough face lined with worry. Thought you might need something to help you sleep. I don't think I'll ever sleep again, Eleanor said truly. Martha put down the tray and went behind Eleanor's chair, gently taking out the pins from her fancy hair. Child, I've seen you grow from a wild little girl into a fine young woman. Your mom would be proud of who you've become. Would she? Or would she be sad that I'm making the same mistake she did? Martha's hand stopped. What do you mean? Eleanor turned to face her mom's journal. I've read every word. She married Dad because her family set it up just like he said. But she was never happy, was she? She was thankful, pretty, everything a wife should be, but she was never really happy. The older woman's eyes got wet with tears. Your mom found joy where she could. She loved you more than life, and she died at 38, worn out by a life she never picked. Eleanor stood fast, walking to the window. I can't do it, Martha. I can't marry him. I can't spend the rest of my life being thankful for a jail cell, no matter how fancy it might be. Miss Eleanor, you're talking silly. Where would you go? What would you do? You've never been outside this valley without someone with you. Eleanor pressed her head against the cool glass. Outside, the mountains looked dark against the starry sky. I don't know, but I know I can't stay here and slowly die bit by bit. Your dad would never forgive you. You'd lose everything. Your home, your money, your spot in people. What good is a spot in people if it needs me to stop being me? Eleanor turned back to Martha, her choice getting clear with each word. I'd rather be poor and free than rich and stuck. Martha sat in the chair by the fireplace, suddenly looking all of her 60 years. If you're set on doing this silly thing, at least wait until morning. Plan right. Take stuff, money. If I wait until morning, I'll lose my bravery. Dad will see it in my face, and he'll lock me in this room until the wedding. Eleanor went to her closet, pulling out her most useful dress, a simple brown wool that she'd worn for her secret rides to the far fields. I have to go now while everyone's asleep. She changed fast, her hands shaking as she did the buttons. The green gown lay across the bed like a thrown-away dream. Eleanor slipped the engagement ring from her finger and put it on top of the silk fabric. At least take some money, Martha whispered, pulling Asmall leather bag from her apron. I've been saving for years. It's not much, but I can't take your savings. You can and you will. Martha pushed the bag into Eleanor's hands. Your mom would want me to help you find the bravery she never had. Eleanor hugged the woman who'd been more of a mom to her than anyone since Catherine's death. Thank you for everything, for raising me, for loving me, for getting it. Where will you go? Eleanor looked toward the window one last time into the mountains. As far as I can walk before dawn, child, that's wild out there. Wild animals, storms, men who might hurt me, like the man Dad wants me to marry. Eleanor put on a small bag she'd packed with what little she thought might help. I'd rather take my chances with wild animals than with a man who sees me as a thing. Martha caught her arm as she reached for the door. The mountain man you asked about, Silas Kane. His cabin is somewhere up near Eagle's Peak, if you can find him. What? He'll help me, Martha. He's a loner who hasn't talked to another person in years. Why would he help a stranger? Because, Martha said softly, sometimes the people who've been hurt the most are the ones who get pain in others. And sometimes, child, we have to trust in the kindness of strangers when the people who should love us let us down. Eleanor kissed Martha's cheek one last time, then slipped from her room into the dark hall. The house creaked and moved around her as she made her way to the back door, every sound seeming loud as thunder in the midnight quiet. The cool September air hit her face like a blessing as she stepped onto the back porch. Above her, a million stars moved across the sky, and somewhere among them were the answers she couldn't find inside these walls. She walked toward the mountains without looking back, her feet finding the path by moonlight and feeling. Behind her, the Whitmore place got smaller and smaller until it was just another shadow in the valley. Ahead, Lathe unknown, dangerous, scary, and totally needed. The first hour was easy, following the well-used trail that led to the high fields where their cows ate in summer. Eleanor had ridden this path lots of times, though never alone and never at night. The known spots gave her bravery. The lightning-hit pine, the creek that sang over smooth stones, the field where wildflowers grew in spring. But as the trail started to go up steeper into new land, Eleanor's soft shoes began to pinch and blister. Her breath came shorter in the thin mountain air. The happy creek became a far sound, then gone completely by the time the east sky started to show the first bits of dawn. Eleanor was lost. She stood in a group of aspen trees, their golden leaves whispering secrets she couldn't get. Every way looked the same. Endless woods going up rocky hills toward peaks that seemed both closer and farther than when she'd started. Her water was almost gone. Her feet were bleeding inside her bad shoes, and somewhere behind her, the search groups would be starting as soon as her being gone was found. Eleanor sat down on a fallen log, suddenly getting the size of what she'd done. She was a protected girl who'd never spent a night outside in her life, and she'd walked into wild that could kill her in lots of ways. But even as fear went up her back, she found she couldn't be sorry for her choice. Better to die free than live is Morrison's thing. Better to face whatever dangers the mountains held than give in to a lifetime of slow-no air and silk and silver. A branch snapped somewhere behind her. Eleanor turned fast, her heart pounding, thinking to see her dad's men, or worse, Morrison himself, come to pull her back. Instead, she saw nothing but trees and shadows and the growing light of dawn. Another sound closer this time. Footsteps. For sure footsteps, moving through the bushes with the sureness of someone who knew these woods well. Eleanor stood frozen, scared to run and scared to stay. The footsteps stopped just outside her sight, and she held her breath, waiting. "Ma'am," came a voice deep and careful and surprisingly nice. "You're a long way from anywhere safe." A man stepped into the open spot, and Eleanor's first thought was that he looked like something from the old tales Martha used to tell. A figure made from the mountains themselves, tall and wide-shouldered, with dark hair that touched his collar, and a beard that couldn't quite hide the strong line of his jaw. His clothes were simple but well-made, leather vest, worn jeans, boots that had seen lots of miles of rough land. But it was his eyes that got her notice, brown as rich dirt, and holding a depth of getting it that made her want to tell him everything. "You're Silas Kane," she said, though she wasn't sure how she knew. He nodded slowly. "And you're the Whitmore girl who's got half the area looking for her." Eleanor lifted her chin, trying to get the pride her dad had taught her since she was little. "Eleanor Whitmore. Yes, and I'm not lost. I'm right where I picked to be." Something that might have been a tiny smile touched his lips. "Is that so? And where exactly do you pick to be?" "Miss Whitmore." "Free," she said simply. The word hung between them in the morning air, carrying all the weight of everything she'd left behind and everything she hoped to find. Silas Kane looked at her for a long moment, taking in her bad shoes, her torn skirt, the tiredness and sureness fighting in her face. "Free is a dangerous place for someone who doesn't know how to live in it," he said finally. "Then teach me," Eleanor heard herself say, surprising them both. "Please." And in that moment, as the sun topped the peaks and painted the world in gold and shadow, Eleanor Whitmore took the first real step toward becoming the woman she was meant to be. Eleanor's eyes opened to new surroundings, rough-cut log walls, a stone fireplace popping with warmth, and the smell of pine and woods that seemed to be in every corner. For a moment she thought she was dreaming. Then the stuff from the day before came back. Her escape, the long walk through the wild, the fall from being so tired, and the quiet man who'd carried her passed-out body to safety. She lay on a simple bed with thick wool blankets, still in her torn brown dress, but with her ruined shoes put neatly beside the bed. Across the one-room cabin, Silas Kane sat at a rough wooden table, writing in what looked like a leather book. The morning light coming through the single window caught the careful moves of his hand as he made words on the page. "You're awake," he said without looking up, his voice with the same nice tone that had surprised her in the woods. Eleanor tried to sit up, her body hurting every move. "How long was I? 2 days?" Silas closed the book and put down his pencil, a short bit of lead wrapped in paper that looked sharpened many times. "You were in bad shape when I found you. No water, tired out, feet cut up from those fancy shoes." Eleanor looked down at her wrapped feet, shame making her cheeks hot. "I'm sorry to be such trouble." "I didn't think." "No, you didn't." The words were straight, but not mean. City people never do when they decide to take on the wild. The cabin was simply set up, but surprisingly clean and neat. A stone fireplace took upon wall with iron pots and pans hanging from hooks nearby. Shelves on another wall filled with glass jars with what looked like saved food, dried herbs, and other stuff. A rifle sat in the corner, well kept, but clearly used for need rather than fun. "Where are we?" Eleanor asked. "My home. About 15 miles northeast of your dad's place near Eagle's Peak." Silas stood and went to the fireplace, scooping something from a pot into a wooden bowl. "You need to eat." "Haven't kept much down in 2 days." He gave her the bowl, a simple stew that smelled better than anything from her dad's fancy kitchen. Eleanor took a careful sip and found it tasty with meat and veggies, flavored with herbs she couldn't name. "This is yummy," she said, surprised by her hunger. "Deer meat, wild onions, some carrots from my garden." Silas went back to his chair, watching her eat with the careful look of someone used to caring for hurt things. "You asked me to teach you how to be free. First lesson, free people know how to feed themselves." Eleanor stopped, spoon halfway to her mouth. "You remember that?" "I remember everything you said." He picked up his book again, running his thumb along its worn leather cover. "Question is, did you mean it or were you just scared and saying whatever came to mind?" The challenge in his voice sparked something in Eleanor's chest. "He meant every word. I'd rather die free than live as someone's thing." "Dying's easy," Silas said quietly. "Living free, that takes work. Every day, every choice, every pick to keep going when things get hard." "You sure you're ready for that kind of work?" Eleanor met his steady look. "I want to learn." For the first time since she'd woken, something that might have been okay flickered in his dark eyes. "Finish the stew. Then we'll see what you're made of." The next few hours tested Eleanor in ways she'd never thought. Silas had her practice making a fire from nothing, showing her how to find the right dry stuff, how to hit flint and steel until her fingers were sore, how to grow a tiny spark into flames that could mean the difference between life and death in the wild. "Fire's not just for warmth," he explained as Eleanor finally got a flame going. "It's safety, cooking, signaling comfort. When you're alone in the dark, master fire. And you've taken the first step toward real being on your own." Next came water. Finding it, cleaning it, saving it. Silas led her to a small spring hidden behind rocks, teaching her to read the signs that meant clean water versus water that might kill her. "City water comes from pipes," he said, cupping the clear stuff in his hands. "Out here, you learn to listen to what the land tells you. This spring's been running clean for as long as I've been here, but you test it every time. Look for animal tracks. If they drink here often, it's probably safe. But if you see dead animals upstream or the water smells bad, you keep looking." Eleanor knelt by the spring, trying to remember everything he told her. The cold mountain water made her fingers numb, but she found herself loving its pure taste. Nothing like the metal taste of the water that came from her dad's place. "How long have you been here?" she asked as they walked back toward the cabin. Silas was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, 12 years come October. "You must have been young when you came up here, 26. Old enough to know better. Young enough to think running away would fix anything." There was pain in his voice, carefully held, but clear. Eleanor wanted to ask more, but something in how he stood warned her off. Instead, she focused on walking without tripping, trying to step where he stepped, learning to read the forest floor for blocks and chances. Back at the cabin, Silas gave her his book. "Can you read?" "Of course I can read," Eleanor said, then right away was sorry for the sharp sound. "I'm sorry. Yes, I can read very well." "Good. Writing's just as key. Up here you keep track of things. Weather patterns, animal ways, which plants are safe to eat, and when they're ready to pick. Memory is not enough when your life depends on getting it right." Eleanor opened the book carefully, thinking to find notes about living in the wild. Instead, she found herself looking at detailed notes written in a careful, smart hand. September 15th, first snow on the high peaks. Deer moving to lower spots. Time to check the south sides for late berries. September 20th, storm coming in the southwest. Wind waves suggest 3 days of bad weather. Tie down anything that might blow away. September 25th, found hurt hawk near the field. Wing broken but fixing well. Should be able to let go in another week if it keeps healing. The notes showed a guy who paid notice to the smallest bits of the natural world around him, who cared for hurt animals, who could guess weather days ahead. This wasn't the book of an unlearned loner. This was the work of someone with deep smarts and careful learning. "You're not what people think you are," Eleanor said softly. Silas took the book back, his fingers gentle on the worn leather. "People think what they need to think. Keeps them from asking questions I don't want to answer." "What questions?" He was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. Questions about why a guy with school and chances picks to live alone in the mountains. Questions about what he's running from, what he's trying to forget. Eleanor heard the warning in his voice, but found herself stepping closer to whatever pain he was keeping. "Everyone's running from something. At least you had the bravery to run towards something better." "Better?" Silas looked at her with something that might have been surprise. "You think this is better?" "Yes," Eleanor said without stopping. "You're free. You make your own picks. Live by your own rules. You don't have to smile and nod while someone else picks your future. And you don't have to eat if you can't hunt. Don't have to stay warm if you can't keep a fire going. Don't have to stay dry if you can't read weather signs." His voice was fact, but Eleanor got the message under it. "Freedom's not a gift, Miss Whitmore. It's something you earn every single day. Then teach me how to earn it." Silas looked at her face in the firelight, taking in the sureness that had replaced her earlier not sure. "All right, but we do this right? You learn everything. Hunting, tracking, saving food, reading weather, basic doctor stuff. And you learn it until you can do it in your sleep because someday your life might depend on it. How long will it take? Depends on you. Some people never learn, no matter how long they try. Others pick it up in a season or two." He stopped, then added more quietly. "Question is, how long before they find you up here?" Eleanor had been trying not to think about that. By now, her dad would have search groups checking every trail, every town, every possible hiding spot. And Morrison. She shook to think what Morrison might do when he found his costly bride had gone. "They'll find me sometime," she said. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll think you're dead and stop looking." Silas poked at the fire with an iron stick, sending sparks up toward the roof. "Mountains take lots of people who come up here not ready. Wouldn't be the first time someone just vanished." The thought should have scared her, but instead Eleanor found it oddly nice. If the world below thought she was dead, they'd stop hunting for her. She could build a new life up here, free from the rules and duties that had nearly no heired her. "Would you mind?" she asked. "If I stayed? If I learned to take care of myself up here?" Silas was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low she had to strain to hear it. "I've been alone for 12 years, Miss Whitmore. Got used to the quiet, the being alone. Having someone else around, it changes things." "I could build my own cabin," Eleanor said fast. "I wouldn't bother your alone time. I need time to learn to figure out who I am when I'm not being what everyone else wants. Building a cabin that'll stand a mountain winter takes more than good wants. Takes know-how, tools, help from someone who knows what they're doing." Eleanor felt her heart drop. Of course, she couldn't just build a cabin from nothing. She was a spoiled girl who'd never even hit a nail. "I could help you with yours," she said. "Cooking, cleaning, fixing, whatever you need, in trade for letting me stay and teaching me what I need to know." Silas looked at her, then really looked at her as if seeing something he hadn't seen before. "You get what you're asking? To live up here through a mountain winter. No helpers, no fancy clothes, no people parties, just living day after day?" "Yes," Eleanor said strong. "That's just what I want." "All right, then." Silas closed his book and put it aside. "But we do this right. You do your share. You follow my lead when it comes to staying alive. And you don't complain when things get hard. Because they will get hard, Miss Whitmore. Harder than anything you've ever known." Eleanor felt a smile pull at her lips. The first real smile she'd had in months. "It's Eleanor. Just Eleanor." "And I won't complain." "We'll see about that," Silas said. But she caught the hint of warmth in his voice. "Tomorrow we start your real learning. Tonight you rest and heal. You'll need your strength for what's coming." As Eleanor settled back onto the bed, pulling the wool blankets up to her chin, She felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Outside, the wind whispered through the pine trees, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. For the first time in her life, she was right where she wanted to be. Down in the valley, mess ruled at the Whitmore place. Charles Whitmore stood in his library, his usually perfect look, messy after 3 days of setting up search groups and handling questions from more mad visitors. His prized train watch lay open on the desk, its steady tick, a joke of time going away without answers. "Nothing, sir," reported Jake Morrison, Bartholomew's younger brother and the leader of the latest search group. "We've covered every trail within 20 miles, checked every line shack and hunting cabin we could find. It's like she just vanished into thin air." Bartholomew Morrison walked behind Charles's desk like a caged wolf, his thin face twisted with barely held anger. "She didn't vanish. Someone took her, or she's hiding somewhere playing games like a spoiled kid." "My daughter is not," Charles started. "Your daughter has cost me big shame." Morrison cut him off. "The engagement news was in papers from here to Denver. Do you have any idea what this makes me look like?" Charles bit back his first answer. The truth was he cared more about Eleanor's safety than Morrison's hurt pride. But their business deals were too good to risk with truth. "We'll find her, Bartholomew. She can't have gone far." "She could be dead by now," Jake Morrison said straight. "City girl alone in the wild. Mountain lions, bears, cliffs in the dark." "She's not dead," Morrison snapped. "She's too stubborn to die. No, she's out there somewhere, probably laughing at all of us scrambling around looking for her." Martha came in with a tea set, her moves careful and held. She'd been asked lots about Eleanor's gone, but had said nothing beyond showing right worry for her missing girl. "Any word from the sheriff's men?" Charles asked her. "They're checking the mining camps up north," Martha replied even. "Some thought maybe she'd gone toward the train to catch a ride out of the area." Morrison's laugh was bitter. "With what money?" "You said yourself nothing was missing from her room except the clothes on her back." "Actually," Martha said carefully, "I think some of her jewelry might be missing. Nothing too costly, just some bits her mom left her. It was a lie, but a helpful one. Eleanor had taken nothing but the clothes she wore and Martha's small savings. But if the searchers thought she had money, they might focus on towns and train stops rather than the wild." Charles grabbed this chance. Of course, she could have traded jewelry for a ride to California or back east to her aunt in Boston. "Then why haven't we heard anything from the train?" Morrison asked. "I've had men checking every stop between here and Denver. Maybe she was smart enough to skip the main lines," Jake said. "Lots of freight trains that don't ask questions about riders who can pay." Meanwhile, 15 miles away in the highland, Eleanor was finding that learning to live needed muscles she'd never used and rough spots she'd never needed. Silas had started her learning for real, starting with the basic skills and building from there. "Hold it steady," he told as Eleanor fought with the hand plane, trying to smooth the piece of pine he'd cut for firewood. The wood wants to split clean if you work with the grain, not against it. Eleanor's arms hurt from the new move, and her hands were already blistered despite the work glove Silas had given her. But slowly she was starting to see how the rough wood could be shaped into something useful. "Like this?" she asked, fixing her hold. "Better. You're learning to listen to what the wood tells you." Silas watched her work for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. Everything up here has its own voice. Wood, stone, water, weather. City folks spend so much time talking they forget how to listen." Eleanor stopped her planing, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "Is that why you came up here? To learn how to listen?" Silas was quiet for a moment, thinking his answer. "I came up here to stop hearing things I didn't want to hear anymore." The listening part came later. "What kind of things? Orders, gunshots, screaming?" The words came out flat in fact, but Eleanor caught the pain under them. "War has a way of filling your head with sounds that never quite go away." Eleanor put down the plane, giving him her full notice. "You were a soldier, Union Army, fought from Bull Run to Appomattox and most everywhere in between." Silas picked up a piece of carved wood from his workbench. A small comb with fancy patterns worked into the handle. "Came home to find everything I'd fought to protect was gone. Your family, wife, and daughter. Fever took them the winter before the war ended. I was off playing soldier while they died alone." His fingers traced the carved patterns on the comb, gentle as a touch. "And made this for my daughter's 5th birthday. Never got to give it to her." Eleanor's heart hurt for the pain in his voice. "I'm so sorry." "World's full of sorrow. Adding mine to the pile doesn't change anything." Silas put the comb aside and picked up his own plane, showing the smooth, practiced move she was trying to get. Point is, I get what it means to run away from a life that doesn't fit anymore. Is that what I'm doing? Running away? That's what you started doing. Question is, what are you running toward? Eleanor thought about this as she started her work again. The body work was harder than anything she'd ever tried, but there was something really good about shaping raw wood into something useful with her own hands. No helpers, no in-betweens, just her will and work making something real. I think I'm running toward myself, she said finally. The person I might be if I wasn't trying to be what everyone else wanted. And what kind of person is that? Eleanor smiled, surprising herself with the sureness of her answer. Someone who can build her own fire and find her own water. Someone who doesn't need okay to make picks about her own life. Those are good things to be, Silas agreed. But being on your own doesn't mean being alone. Even up here, I count on others sometimes. Trade with trappers, buy stuff in town. Nobody lives totally alone. I don't want to be totally alone, Eleanor said softly. I just want to pick my own company. Their eyes met across the workbench, and Eleanor felt something change between them, a knowing of shared getting. Here was a guy who'd also run from a world that asked too much and gave too little. Here was someone who got the cost of freedom and was ready to pay it. Silas cleared his throat and went back to the wood in his hand. Afternoon's going on. We should check the traps I set yesterday. See if we caught anything for dinner. Eleanor followed him into the woods, trying to step quiet as he taught her. The traps were simple but smart things. Wire loops put on animal paths, made to catch rabbits and other small game without needing constant watch. First rule of hunting, Silas explained as they got to the first trap. Never kill more than you can use. Take what you need, leave the rest for tomorrow. The trap held a fat rabbit killed fast and clean. Eleanor felt a moment of sadness for the small life, but also thanks. This animal would feed them tonight, and its fur could be used for winter clothes. Does it get easier? She asked as Silas reset the trap. Taking life for food? No, and it shouldn't. The day you stop feeling thankful for what you take is the day you stop being human. He put the rabbit over his shoulder and went toward the next trap. But you learn to make the death mean something. Use every part. Waste nothing. Remember that this animal gave its life so you could keep yours. The second trap was empty, but the third held another rabbit. As they walked back toward the cabin, Eleanor found herself thinking about the difference between this and the fancy meal at her dad's table. There, meat showed up like magic from the kitchen, with no thought to the animals that had died to give it. Here, she was closely tied to every part of living. Silas, she said as they got near the cabin, the comb you made for your daughter. It's pretty work. You could sell pieces like that. Don't need money up here. But if you ever wanted to go down to town, or if you needed stuff you couldn't make yourself, I go to town twice a year, Silas said, strong. Buy what I can't make, trade what I don't need, and get back up here as fast as I can. Eleanor heard the warning in his voice, but kept on. I just meant that you have skills people would like. You don't have to hide them away up here. Silas stopped walking and turned to face her. Miss Eleanor, I didn't come up here to start a business or show off my woodwork. I came here to vanish, but you didn't vanish, Eleanor said gently. You're still here, still making pretty things, still helping hurt hawks and lost girls. Maybe it's time to stop hiding from the world. And maybe, Silas said, his voice with a bit of hard, you don't get what I'm hiding from. The words hung between them in the cooling mountain air. Eleanor knew she'd pushed too far, too fast. Whatever had driven Silas to this mountain spot was deeper and more hurt than the simple sad of losing his family. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I didn't mean to poke. Silas's face softened a bit. You meant well, but some doors are better left shut. That evening, as they got the rabbits ready for dinner, Eleanor found herself looking at Silas's hands as he worked. They were skilled hands, marked from years of hard work, but able to be really gentle. The way he cleaned the meat, the careful notice he paid to saving the fur, the respect he showed for the animals that would feed them. All of it spoke to a deep getting of life and death and the duty that came with living. Where did you learn all this? She asked as he showed her how to skin the rabbits right. Some from my dad. He was a farmer before the war took our land. Some from other soldiers who grew up hunting. Most of it from 12 years of making mistakes and learning from them. Silas guided her hands, showing her the right angle for the knife. Trial and error's a hard teacher, but it sticks. As they worked together in the growing dark, Eleanor felt a happy she'd never known in her dad's big house. Her hands were dirty, her dress was stained, and tomorrow would bring more hard work and new tests. But for the first time in her life, she was right where she wanted to be. The comb Silas had carved for his lost daughter lay on the workbench nearby, its fancy pattern sketching the firelight. It was a thing of beauty made from love and loss, hope and memory. Like the man who'd made it, it showed the chance of finding nice in the middle of sad. Eleanor picked up the comb carefully, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Would you teach me to carve?" Silas looked up from his work, surprise in his dark eyes. "It's not easy work. Takes patience, steady hands. I have time to learn patience, and my hands are getting steadier every day." For a long moment, he looked at her face in the firelight. Then, slowly, he nodded. "All right, but we start simple. No fancy patterns until you've got the basics." Eleanor smiled, putting the comb gently back in its place. Tomorrow would bring new lessons in living, new tests to beat. But tonight, she was happy to sit by the fire with a guy who got the value of pretty things made by careful hands, learning to find her own spot in a world that had once seemed too big and scary. Outside, the wind sang through the pine trees and somewhere in the valley below. Search groups kept their useless hunt for a woman who had already found just what she was looking for. 3 weeks had gone since Eleanor's coming to the mountain cabin, and the change was amazing. Her soft hands now had rough spots from working with wood and rope. Her pale skin had taken on a healthy shine from days spent outside. Most key, her moves had got the quiet sureness that came from learning to trust her own skills. This morning, she knelt beside a patch of late-blooming wildflowers near the cabin, carefully pressing a perfect mountain aster between the pages of Silas's book. The purple petals were soft as silk with golden centers that seemed to hold sunshine. She'd asked okay to start a collection, a record of the plants she was learning to know for food, medicine, and simple pretty. "That tone's good for tummy troubles," Silas said, sitting beside her with 2 cups of pine needle tea. "Brew the leaves into tea, but don't use too much or you'll make the problem worse instead of better." Eleanor took the warm cup thankfully. The morning air had the sharp bite of coming winter, though the days were still nice. "How do you remember it all? Every plant, every animal sign, every weather pattern. Same way you learn to read books. Practice, repeat, and making mistakes until you get it right." Silas watched her carefully close the book, keeping the pressed flower safe. "Your dad teach you to read?" "My mom, really, before she died." Eleanor smoothed her hand over the book's leather cover. "She said books were windows to worlds we might never see otherwise. I used to think she meant far places, Europe, the Orient. I never thought she might have meant this." "This what?" Eleanor pointed at the vast view spread below them. Endless woods rolling toward snowy peaks. Fields where elk ate in the morning mist. A world that worked by rules older and more true than anything people made. "Freedom," she said simply. "The kind of life where your picks matter because you're the one who has to live with what happens." Silas looked at her sidey as she spoke, noting the strength that had replaced the not sure he'd seen in her face that first morning. "You fit in faster than I thought. Most city folks give up after the first week when the fun wears off and the real work starts. Most city folks probably had something to go back to." Eleanor took a sip of the bitter tea, no longer making a face at its doctor taste. "I burned my bridges the night I walked away from that engagement. Even if I wanted to go back, which I don't, there's nothing waiting for me but shame and a life I couldn't stand to live." "Your dad might forgive." "My dad sees me as a business thing that went missing. When I'm found, if I'm found, I'll be locked away until I agree to marry Morrison or someone like him." Eleanor's voice had no mad, just the calm sure of someone who got her spotfully. "I picked freedom over safety. I can't be sorry for that choice." They sat in as quiet, drinking their tea and watching a red-tailed hawk circle high up. Eleanor had learned to read the bird's flight ways. Today it was hunting, not just flying for fun. Somewhere below in the grass, small creatures were changing their ways, freezing or running, based on feelings made over lots of times. "Silas," Eleanor said carefully, "may I ask you something personal?" His body got tight a bit, but he nodded. "The war, how long ago did it end for you?" "On paper, April of 1865, when Lee gave up. For me," Silas was quiet for a long moment. "Some wars never really end. They just move inside your head and keep fighting there." Eleanor waited, sensing there was more he wanted to say. "I was a sharp shooter," he went on finally. "Good at it, too. Could put a bullet through a playing card at 500 yards. My boss guys were always saying good about my skill, talking about how many enemy soldiers I'd taken out, how much my shooting helped our wins." He stopped, looking out at the peaceful view. "Took me years to get that every one of those targets was somebody's son, somebody's dad, somebody's brother. Men with families waiting for them to come home. Dreams they'd never get to do. Silas's hands tightened around his cup. By the time I figured that out, I'd killed so many I stopped counting. Eleanor felt her heart hurt for the pain in his voice. You were a soldier. You were following orders, fighting for something you believed in. Was I? Or was I just good at killing and too young to get what that meant? Silas shook his head. When I came home and found my family dead, part of me thought it was fair. Like God was making things even for all the families I'd broken. That's not fair, Eleanor said, strong. That's sad. The war, your family's death, the guilt you've been carrying, none of it was your fault. Maybe not, but that doesn't make it easier to live with. Eleanor reached out and touched his hand, feeling the rough spots and marks that told the story of his years away. Is that why you stay up here? Because you think you don't deserve forgive? Silas looked down at their joined hands, his face hard to read. I stay up here because it's the only place I found peace. The only place where the ghosts don't follow. But they did follow you, didn't they? That's why you keep that book. Why you notice every detail of the world around you. You're trying to balance the scales, all that death you caused against all the life you're now keeping and saving. The note hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Eleanor knew she was still holding his hand and started to pull away, but Silas's fingers tightened around hers. How did you get so wise? He asked softly. I'm not wise. I'm just someone who gets what it means to carry guilt for things you can't control. Eleanor thought of her mom dying young, while Eleanor grew up lucky and safe. Sometimes the hardest person to forgive is yourself. They sat together as the morning got warmer around them, hands linked, both lost in thoughts of the past and chances for the future. Eleanor had never felt so tied to another person, not through shared people or family duty, but through the deeper knowing of shared fight and same understanding. Eleanor, Silas said after a bit, there's something you should know about why I really brought you here instead of taking you back to your dad. Eleanor's heart skipped. What do you mean? That first night when I found you passed out in the woods, you were out of it from being tired talking in your sleep. You kept saying, please don't make me marry him. Please don't make me. Over and over like you were trying to talk to someone who wouldn't listen. Eleanor felt heat in her cheeks. I don't remember that. I figured any woman bad enough to run into the wild rather than marry someone probably had good reason. Silas's thumb traced across her knuckles. So, I decided to give you a choice your family wouldn't. Time to figure out what you really wanted instead of what other people wanted for you. And what if what I want isn't what's best for me? Then at least it'll be your mistake to make, Eleanor laughed, surprised by the sound. That might be the most freeing thing anyone has ever said to me. Freedom's not about making the right picks, Silas said, his own lips bending in what might have been the start of a smile. It's about having the right to make your own picks, even if they're wrong, as if called by their laughter. A deer stepped lightly into the open below them, followed by a spotted baby. Mom and child moved with the smooth grace of creatures perfect for their spot, alert, but not scared in their own land. She's pretty, Eleanor whispered. First baby I've seen this close to the cabin, Silas whispered back. Usually they stay deeper in the woods until the young ones are stronger. They watched amazed as the deer mom taught her baby to know safe plants, pushing the little one away from anything bad. It was a top lesson in living, passed down through feeling and careful watching. Look, Eleanor breathed. The baby had come close enough to notice the pressed flower in Eleanor's open book. Curious, it stretched its neck toward the bright purple petals, then jumped back to its mom's side when Eleanor moved a bit. Even the wild things like pretty, Silas saw quietly. Eleanor carefully closed the book, keeping both the flower and the moment. The deer moved on, going into the woods as quiet as they'd come. But the magic of the meat stayed. I want to learn to carve flowers like that, Eleanor said sudden, as columbines and Indian paintbrush all the pretty things that grow up here. Flowers are hard to carve. Lots of soft detail work. Then I'll start with something easier and work my way up. Eleanor's voice held the same sureness that had carried her away from her dad's house and up into these mountains. I have time to learn. Silas smiled. A real smile that changed his whole face. Yes, you do. We both do. As they walked back toward the cabin, Eleanor knew that somewhere in the past few weeks, her bad flight from an unwanted marriage had become something else totally. She was no longer running away from her old life. She was running toward something new and way more special. The mountain aster pressed between the pages of Silas's book would be a reminder of this morning. This moment when two hurt souls had found in each other the bravery to believe in pretty again. And maybe, Eleanor thought as she watched Silas gather firewood with practiced speed, in the chance of love growing in the most surprised spots. October brought the first real storm to the high land, and with it Eleanor's real learning in mountain living. She woke to the sound of wind howling around the cabin like a live thing, shaking the windows and sending pine needles across the roof. "Storm's going to be a bad one," Silas said, already dressed and checking their stuff. "Could last 3 days, maybe more. We need to make sure everything's tied down before it gets worse." Eleanor pulled on her warmest clothes, wool pants, and a thick sweater she'd traded her silk underdress for during Silas's last trip to town. Amazing how fast what matters changed when living depended on useful over pretty. Outside, the world had changed overnight. Heavy clouds pushed down on the peaks, and the air tasted of snow and spark. The wind whipped Eleanor's hair around her face as she helped Silas tie down anything that might blow away. "The horses?" she asked, having to yell over the wind. "Already moved them to the safe pen behind the cabin. They'll be fine as long as we keep them fed and watered." Silas tested the rope holding down a cover over their winter wood stack. "It's us I'm worried about." As if called by his words, the first snowflakes began to fall. Not the soft float of a normal mountain snow, but hard-hitting bits that stung bare skin. Within minutes, the flakes got bigger, and the fall got heavier until they could barely see 20 feet in any way. They went back to the cabin just as the storm let loose its full mad. Eleanor had never felt anything like it. The constant roar of wind, the cabin creaking and moving as gusts tested its build. The weird half-light that made afternoon feel like evening. "Is the cabin strong enough?" she asked, trying to keep worry out of her voice. "Built it myself using ways I learned from a trapper who'd lived 40 winters up here." Silas added wood to the fire, the flames making dancing shadows on the walls. "She'll hold, but we might be stuck inside for a while." By evening, snow had piled halfway up the windows. The world outside had gone totally, leaving them alone in their small circle of warmth and light. Eleanor found herself thankful for the hours she'd spent learning to tend a fire right. "Tonight their lives might depend on keeping the flames going. Tell me about your family," she said, as they sat by the hearth, sharing a dinner of saved deer meat and veggies from Silas's root spot. Silas was quiet for so long that Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft with memory. "Sarah was 19 when we married. Prettiest girl in 3 areas with a laugh that could make you believe anything was possible." He pulled something from his pocket. A small army medal old with age. "She used to say I was too serious, that I needed to learn how to play again after the war." Eleanor looked at the medal he held. A bronze star with ribbons faded by time and touching. "What's that for?" "Bravery at Gettysburg. Saved my boss guy when his horse was shot from under him." Silas's laugh was bitter. "They give you medals for killing people well. Call it being a hero." "Maybe it was being a hero. Maybe you saved more lives by ending Theon's you did. Maybe. Sarah used to say something like that. She'd tell me that good men sometimes have to do bad things so that innocent people can sleep safe." He turned the medal over in his hands. "She never knew how many men I'd killed. I never told her." "And your daughter?" Silas's face softened fully. "Emma, she was 3 when I left for the war. 5 when he stopped, unable to finish. She had Sarah's laugh in my stubborn way. Could climb any tree in the area, catch fireflies with her bare hands, ask more questions in an hour than most people think of in a lifetime." Eleanor reached for his free hand, offering what nice she could. "What happened to them?" "Scarlet fever. The winter of 1864. I was off fighting in Georgia while my girls were dying alone in Ohio." Silas closed his fingers around the medal. "Got the letter 3 months after they were buried. By the time I made it home, there was nothing left but graves and memories." "Oh, Silas." Eleanor felt tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry." "Sold everything. Spent 2 years drinking myself toward the grave, then got sober enough to see I was shaming their memory by throwing my life away." He looked up at her, his dark eyes showing the firelight. "So I came up here to figure out how to live with what I'd lost." "And have you figured it out?" "I mean, I thought I had until you showed up and reminded me what it felt like to care about someone again." The words hung between them like a telling. Eleanor felt her heart speed up, knowing the change in their tie that had been building for weeks. "Silas, I know it's not fair," he said fast. "You're young, pretty, smart. You could have any life you wanted once this mess with your dad gets fixed." You don't need to tie yourself to a worn-out soldier with more ghosts than sense. What if I'm not looking for fair? Eleanor moved closer to him on the rough wooden bench. What if I'm looking for real? Outside, the storm raged with new mad, but inside, the cabin time seemed stopped. Eleanor looked at Silas's face in the firelight. The strong jaw with whiskers, the eyes that had seen too much but still held nice, the mouth that spoke hard truths with nice words. You don't know what you're saying, he said low. I know just what I'm saying. Eleanor reached up to touch his cheek, feeling the roughness of his beard under her palm. I know what it's like to live with ghosts, Silas. I know what it's like to feel to blame for someone else's death. Your mom. I was 8 when she died, old enough to get that she was sick, too young to do anything about it. For years, I blamed myself for not being able to save her, for not being good enough to make her want to fight harder to stay alive. Silas covered her hand with his. Kids aren't to blame for their parents' deaths, and soldiers aren't to blame for orders they followed in wartime. Eleanor leaned closer, close enough to see the bits of gold in his brown eyes. We're both carrying guilt for things we can't control. Maybe it's time to start forgiving ourselves. Eleanor. She stopped him by pressing her lips to his soft and not sure at first, then with growing sureness as he answered. The kiss tasted of pine needle tea and promises of being alone, finally finding its match, and 2 hurt souls finding they could heal each other. When they finally broke apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers. This changes everything. Good, Eleanor whispered. Everything needed changing. The storm kept on through the night and into the next day. But Eleanor barely saw it. She was too busy learning the way of Silas's smiles, the way his eyes wrinkled when he laughed, the gentle strength of his hands as he taught her to carve her first simple flower, a raw copy of the mountain aster from her collection. Patience, he said low, guiding her knife along the wood grain. Let the wood tell you where it wants to be cut. Eleanor found herself focusing not just on the carving, but on the warmth of his body behind hers, the steady sound of his breathing, the way he smelled of woods and pine. When had she started thinking of this cabin as home? When had this man become key to her happy? Tell me about your dreams, she said as they worked together by lamplight. Before the war, before everything went wrong, what did you want your life to be? Silas was quiet for a moment, thinking. I wanted to be a teacher. Loved books, loved learning. Thought I could make a difference by passing on to the next kids. You could still do that. Who's going to hire a loner with blood on his hands to teach their kids? Someone who gets that the best teachers are often the ones who've learned from their own mistakes. Eleanor put down her carving and turned to face him. You've taught me more in a month than I learned in 23 years of school. That's different. You're what? Special different or just someone who needed to learn what you had to teach? Eleanor smiled. There are other people out there who need what you know, Silas, about living, about bouncing back, about finding peace after bad. You make it sound so easy. It is easy, not simple, but easy. Eleanor picked up the medal he'd left on the work spot, looking at the worn bronze. This shows one part of your story, but it's not the whole story. You're also the guy who helps hurt hawks back to health, who carves pretty things with his hands, who gave a spoiled girl a chance to find who she really was. Silas took the medal from her fingers and looked at it for a long moment. Then with set move, he put it in the small wooden box where he kept his few special things. Maybe, he said quietly, it's time to stop carrying that bit of the past. Eleanor felt something change in the space between them, a letting go, a picking of hope over guilt. Outside, the storm was starting to weaken. But inside the cabin, something stronger than weather was building. That night, as they lay together on the narrow bed, Eleanor in his arms for the first time, both of them fully dressed, but feeling open. She got that. She had found what she'd been looking for without knowing it. Not just freedom from her dad's plans, but freedom topic love on her own way. Are you sure about this? Silas asked softly, his breath warm against her hair. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Eleanor whispered back. Theme doll lay hidden in its box and tomorrow would bring new tests. But tonight, 2 people who had lost everything, they thought mattered, had found something way more special in each other's arms. Eleanor was gathering firewood near the creek when she heard voices coming up from the valley below. She froze, her arms full of split pine, trying to hear words over the sound of running water. Male voices, more than one, and they were getting closer, moving as quiet as Silas had taught her. She crept to the edge of the open and looked through the trees. 3 men on horses were following the creek up, their voices carrying clearly in the thin mountain air. "Tracks lead this way. Fresh ones, too," one was saying. "Could be anybody." "Trappers, hunters, drifters," replied another. "Or kidnappers hiding their catch where nobody thinks to look." This voice was different, smart, bossy, and scary familiar. Eleanor's blood went cold. Bartholomew Morrison. She dropped the firewood and ran for the cabin, her heart pounding against her ribs. Silas looked up from his carving as she burst through the door, right away reading the fear in her face. "Search party," she gasped. "Morrison's with them. They're following the creek." Silas was on his feet right away, moving with the smooth speed of a guy used to danger. How far? Maybe half a mile downstream. "Silas, if they find me here with you, they won't." He was already gathering key stuff, stuffing them into a pack with practiced speed. "Back way out through the ridge trail. We can be 10 miles deep in the wild before they reach the cabin." Eleanor's mind raced. What if we're wrong? What if they're just going by? You want to bet your life on that? Silas put on his rifle and gave Eleanor her coat, because that's what you'd be doing. As if called by his words, a shout came from below. "Smoke. There's smoke coming from up ahead." Silas said a bad word under his breath. Too late for the ridge trail. Root cellar. He led Eleanor to a corner of the cabin where a heavy wooden panel covered what she'd thought was just part of the floor. Under it lay a carefully made hiding spot, barely big enough for 2 people but lined with blankets and with water and dried food. "You built this for times like this?" Eleanor asked as they climbed down. "Built it for different times, but it'll work." Silas pulled the panel closed above them, putting them in dark. "Whatever happens, stay quiet. Don't come out until I give the okay, no matter what you hear." They huddled together in the tight space. Eleanor's ear pressed against Silas's chest to quiet the sound of her fast heart. Above them, they could hear the coming horses, the jingle of spurs, voices getting louder as the search party got to the cabin. "Well, well," came Morrison's voice clear as a bell through the floorboards. "What have we here?" Heavy footsteps crossed the cabin floor right overhead. Eleanor heard the scrape of chairs being moved, the clank of pots being looked at, the set sounds of men searching every corner. "Someone's been living here," say Dan, unknown voice. "And recently, too. Fire's still warm. 2 plates on Thedible," saw another. 2 cups. "Either our loner's got company or he's crazier than folks think." Morrison's laugh was cold as winter wind. "Oh, I don't think Silas Kane is crazy at all. I think he's right where we thought to find him." Eleanor felt Silas get tight beside her. Something was wrong, really wrong. Morrison spoke as if he'd known just where to look. "Search every bit," Morrison ordered. "Look for anything that might tell us where they've gone." They came the question. "You think the girl's really up here?" "I'd think," Morrison said slowly, "that Miss Eleanor Whitmore has been playing a very dangerous game. And I think our mountain man has been helping her play it. More footsteps, more searching." Eleanor heard her heart beating so loud she was sure the men above could hear it too. Then Morrison spoke again, and his words turned her blood to ice. "Jake, hand me that wire from my saddlebags." Papers moved overhead. Then Morrison's voice, reading aloud, have confirmed Eleanor Whitmore's spot. "Stop mountain man Silas Kane hiding her in cabin near Eagle's Peak. Stop. Sure witness puts them together. Stop. Tell how to go on. Stop." Eleanor felt the world turn around her. Someone had told on them. Someone had known just where to find them and had sent word to Morrison. "Who's your sure witness?" asked Thaman, called Jake. "Someone with very good reason to want Miss Whitmore found and brought back to her right spot in people." Morrison's voice held happy and bad in same. "Someone who gets that young ladies need help from their betters. The old housekeeper. Martha Henderson has served the Whitmore family true 4 years. She gets that Eleanor's little fight has gone on long enough. Eleanor felt like she'd been stabbed. Martha, dear, kind Martha, who'd helped her escape, who'd given her money and push, had told on her to Morrison. But why, as if reading her thoughts, Morrison went on. Of course, Mrs. Henderson needed some talking to share what she knew. Amazing how helpful people become when you tell just what might happen to their grandkids if they don't help find missing persons. The blood left Eleanor's face. Morrison had threatened Martha's family to get news about Eleanor's spot. The poor woman had been forced to pick between Eleanor's freedom and her own grandkids' safety. So, what's the plan? Jake asked. Storm the place. No need for big show, we wait. They'll come back sometime, probably after dark, thinking we've gone on. Mountain folk are like that. Morrison's voice moved across the cabin as he spoke. Besides, I want to have a little talk with Kane before we finish our business. About what? About the bad crime of taking a good young woman? About the even worse crime of hurting her good while holding her against her will? Eleanor's hands made fists. She hadn't been taken, and she sure hadn't been held against her will. But she got with growing fear that Morrison was making astery that would break both her and Silas. You think Kane forced himself on her? I think Morrison said carefully that when we find Miss Whitmore, she'll be in such a bad way of shock and thanks. For her save that she'll agree to whatever story best keeps her good name. And I think Mr. Kane will find himself facing a pick between a rope and a bullet. What if she won't help? What if she tells people she came up here on her own? Morrison's laugh was like breaking glass. Who's going to believe the wild claims of a woman who's been held stuck in the wild 4 weeks? Clearly the poor thing has been driven half crazy by her bad time. She'll need careful care and close watch to get better from her bad. Eleanor got now. Morrison wasn't just hunting for her. He was making a spot where she would have no pick but to marry him to save her good name and Silas's life. Her on her own gone would become a taking. Her free-picked love would become hurt, and Silas would be shown as a bad guy who deserved whatever bad Morrison picked to give. Beside her in the dark, Silas's breathing had gone deadly quiet. Eleanor could feel the tight coming from his body like heat from a fire. He got the trap as clearly as she did. How long do we wait? Jake asked. As long as it takes. I've come too far and put too much to let a spoiled girl and a worn-down soldier ruin my plans. Morrison's voice got hard. Charles Whitmore owes me more money than he can pay back. This marriage was supposed to fix those debts. If his daughter thinks she can escape her duties by running off with some loner, she's about to learn otherwise. Eleanor's mind spun. Her dad owed Morrison money. The engagement hadn't been about business teams or people climb. It had been about debt pay. She was stuck in a money deal gone bad. What about Kane? Even if you show him as a taker, some folks might ask hard questions. War hero goes bad makes for good paper stories. War hero. Morrison's voice dripped no like. Silas Kane is no hero. He's a runner who left this group during the fight at Atlanta. Court judged away, took his rank, marked as a scared hole, left his fellow soldiers when they needed him most. Eleanor felt Silas go hard beside her. Even in the dark, she could sense his shock and mad. How do you know all this? Jake asked. Because I make it my business to know things about people who might cause me trouble. Kane's been hiding up here for 12 years, but Army records are forever. One wire to the war spot was all it took to get his full service record. So we're hunting a runner and a taker. Sounds like we're doing the area a help. Exactly. When this is over, Silas Kane will be remembered as a bad guy who got just what he deserved, and Eleanor Whitmore will be a thankful bride who owes her save to her loving guy to marry. Eleanor closed her eyes, fighting sick waves. Morrison had twisted everything. Her escape, her love for Silas, even Silas's army work into a web of lies made too. Trapped them both. But even as no hope threatened to take her over, Eleanor felt something else rising in her chest. Mad, pure, clean anger at the not fair of it all. At Morrison's easy mean at a world that would believe his lies just because he was a rich man with standing. She would not go quiet into the cage Morrison had built for her, and she would not let Silas pay the cost for her freedom. Above them, the search kept on, but Eleanor was no longer listening to Morrison's voice. Instead, she was planning, thinking through every skill Silas had taught her, every bit of wild no she'd taken, every plus they might have in this deadly game. Morrison might have money and men and the back of people's ways, but Eleanor had something he'd never thought and couldn't get. The sure of a woman who'd finally learned to fight for what she loved. The fight for her freedom was just starting. They waited in the tight dark for what felt like hours, listening to Morrison's men carefully break Silas's neatly set home. The sound of breaking pots, flipped furniture, and ripped fabric came down through the floor like a list of bad. "Nothing helpful here," Jake finally said. If they were planning to come back, they didn't leave any clues about when or where. "They'll be back," Morrison said with cold sureness. "This is Kane's safe spot. He won't leave it for good for some spoiled city girl." Eleanor felt Silas's hand find hers in the dark, his rough fingers mixing with hers. In that simple touch, she read both sorry and sureness. He blamed himself for bringing this danger into her life, but he was also getting ready to fight. "We'll set up camp in the open," Morrison went on. "Jake, you and Tom take first watch. I want to know the moment anyone comes near this cabin. What if they don't come back tonight? Then we wait another night, and another after that if needed." Morrison's voice carried the weight of a guy used to getting what he wanted. "I've put too much in this setup to let it go now." Footsteps moved toward the door, followed by the sound of horses being led away from the cabin. Eleanor counted the men's voices, 3 total, including Morrison. Not impossible odds, but hard enough when they were armed and waiting for trouble. Silas waited until the sounds went away fully before carefully lifting the wooden panel above them. Pale afternoon light came into their hiding spot, and Eleanor had to blink many times before her eyes got used. The cabin looked like a fight spot. Her pressed flower collection lay spread across the floor, soft petals crushed under boot heels. Silas's carving tools were spread, his furniture flipped, his carefully saved stuff dumped and stepped on. But it was the sight of his dad's compass, broken and lying in pieces near the fireplace, that made Eleanor's hands make fists. The brass case was cracked, the needle bent beyond fix. A set act of breaking that spoke to Morrison's easy mien. "I'm sorry," Silas said quietly, kneeling to gather the pieces. "This compass guided my dad through 30 years of farming, guided me through 4 years of war. It was supposed to guide us to safety." Eleanor knelt beside him, carefully picking the spread bits. "It has guided us to safety. Look." She pointed to the compass needle, which, despite being bent, still pointed north. "It's hurt, but it's not beaten. Just like us." Silas looked at her with something close to wonder. "How are you so calm?" "Morrison's got us stuck. He's planning to break both our good names, and he's made it clear he wants to see me dead." "Because," Eleanor said, standing and going to the window to look at the open below, "I've finally figured out what I'm fighting for. Not just my freedom anymore. Our freedom, our future. The right to pick love over duty." Through the window, she could see Morrison's camp about 100 yards away. 3 men, 3 horses stuffed for a long wait. They'd put themselves with clear views to all ways to the cabin, sure in their fight plus. Eleanor, Silas said carefully, "There's something you need to know about what Morrison said about my Army record." She turned to face him, reading the shame and not sure in his dark eyes. "Whatever it is, it doesn't matter." "It does matter. If there's any truth to his claims about running, is there?" Eleanor cut in. Silas was quiet for a long moment, looking at the broken compass in his hands. "I left my group during the Atlanta fight, but not the way he made it sound." Eleanor waited, giving him space to tell the story in his own way. "We'd been fighting for weeks, taking lots of hurt. I was the best shot in the group, so they kept sending me on special jobs, picking off enemy bosses, messing supply lines. I was good at it, maybe too good." He stopped, getting his thoughts. "Then I got word that Sarah and Emma were sick. Scarlet fever was going through our town, and Sarah's letters were getting more bad. She needed me, and I hadn't seen my family in over a year." Eleanor felt her heart hurt for the hard pick he'd faced. "So I asked for leave. Emergency nice leave to care for my dying family. My boss guy said no. Said the job was too key, that I couldn't be spared." Silas's voice got hard. "He said a soldier's duty was to his group, not his family." "What did you do?" "I left anyway. Went away without leave for 3 weeks trying to get home to Ohio. But the trains were messed. The roads were dangerous. And by the time I made it back to my group, Sarah and Emma were already dead." Eleanor moved to sit beside him, offering what nice she could. "My boss guy was mad. Said I'd left my post during a key work, that men had died because I wasn't there to give cover. Essayed a court judge for running, but you came back. Doesn't that count for something? Seems not. The war ended before the court judge could happen, so they just marked my record and let me go without honor." Silas looked up at her, his eyes showing years of carried guilt. "So Morrison wasn't lying. I'm for real a runner." Eleanor felt anger in her chest. Not at Silas, but at a system that would say bad about a guy for trying to save his dying family. You're not a runner. You're a guy who picked love over duty when the army made you pick between them. The law doesn't see it that way? Then Thelaw is wrong. Eleanor stood, walking to the window again. Morrison's using your army record to make okay whatever he's planning to do to you. But what really happened doesn't make you a scared or a bad. It makes you human. Below in the open, she could see Morrison giving orders to his men. Even at this far, his moves showed big head and boss. He was a guy used to getting his way. Sure, that money and people spot would win the day. Silas, Eleanor said slowly. An idea starting to form. What if Morrison's sureness is also his weak? What do you mean? He's so sure he can control this, so sure that his story of events will be believed, that he might not be ready for us to fight back in ways he doesn't think. Eleanor turned back to face him, her mind going through chances. He's counting on us being quiet hurt. What if we're not? Eleanor, they're armed and they outnumber us. This isn't some room game where smart and sureness always win the day. No, but it's not a simple manhunt either. Eleanor started gathering useful things from the mess. Rope, a hunting knife, some of the food that hadn't been broken. Morrison needs me alive and mostly okay to keep his story. And he needs to kill you in a way that looks okay. That doesn't sound like a plus. It is, though. It means he can't just shoot us right there. He needs to make the right spot, the right sea. That gives us room to move. Silas watched her work, noting the sureness that had replaced her earlier fear. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we don't wait for them to come to us. We go to them, but on our way. Eleanor put on the pack she'd made. Morrison wants to show you as a bad taker. Let's give him a chance to see what real bad looks like when someone threatens the people we love. Eleanor, that's dangerous. Of course it is. But so is staying here and hoping they'll sometime give up and go home. Eleanor went to where Silas kept his rifle, checking to make sure it was loaded. You've been hiding from your past for 12 years. I've been hiding from my future for my whole life. Maybe it's time we both stopped hiding. Silas looked at her face, seeing in it the same hard sure that had carried her away from her dad's house and up into these mountains. What did you have in mind? Eleanor smiled, and for the first time since she'd heard Morrison's voice in the valley, she felt really dangerous. I'm thinking it's time for Eleanor Whitmore to vanish fully, and for someone new to take her place. As the sun started to set behind the peaks, making long shadows across the open, Eleanor and Silas got ready for the fight of their lives. Morrison might have money and men and the back of nice people, but they had something he couldn't buy or scare. The bad bravery of people who'd finally found something worth fighting for. The broken compass lay on the table between them, its bent needle still pointing north toward a not-sure future. But sometimes, Eleanor thought as she checked her knife one last time, the most key ways couldn't be found on any compass. Sometimes you had to go by love and sureness, and the strong belief that freedom was worth any cost you had to pay for it. Tonight they would find just how high that cost might be. Eleanor's fingers traced the soft gold chain of her mom's locket as she and Silas made their way through the dark toward Morrison's camp. The small oval thing held a tiny picture of Catherine Whitmore, young, pretty, and showing the quiet strength that had kept her through a hard life. For bravery, Eleanor whispered, feeling the known weight of the locket against her throat. It had been her mom's wedding gift from Eleanor's grandmom, passed down through times of women who'd faced their own hard picks with whatever niece they could find. They moved like shadows through the pine woods, using every skill Silas had taught her about quiet move and natural hide. Eleanor's city-soft hands, now rough from weeks of mountain life, gripped her hunting knife with steady sureness. The plan was bold and it's easy. Eleanor would walk into Morrison's camp and give up, making enough mess for Silas to put himself in good spot. Then, when Morrison showed his true wants, as his big head would for sure make him do, they would have see to his bad. You remember what we talked about? Silas asked softly as they got to the edge of the open. Eleanor nodded. Let him talk. Let him trap himself with his own words and trust you to know when the moment is right. Through the trees, they could see Morrison's campfire making dancing shadows on 3 bedrolls set around the flames. 2 men sat by the fire while Morrison stood apart looking at a map by lamplight. Even at rest, he showed the tight tension of a hunter waiting to hit. He looks like a guy who's never doubted his own right. Eleanor saw quietly. The most dangerous kind of foe, Silas agreed. Self-right guys don't wait when they tell themselves they're doing a higher thing. Eleanor touched the lockatone last time, drawing strength from the memory of her mom's gentle bravery. Then she stepped into the firelight. "Good evening, Mr. Morrison." All three men jumped to their feet, hands moving fast toward their weapons. Morrison's face went quick through surprise, relief, and cold happy. "Miss Eleanor Whitmore," he said, his voice with the smooth tone of a guy who'd won a hard game. "How nice of you to save us the trouble of hunting you down." Eleanor walked closer to the fire, her hands showing and empty, her stand showing tired and beat. "I'm tired of running, tired of being cold and hungry and scared." "I'm sure you are, my dear. Mountain life is hardly good for a young lady of your nice." Morrison's eyes swept over her simple wool dress and useful boots with clear knot-like. "Where is your taker?" "Gone. He left yesterday when he knew you were closing in." Eleanor sat on a log near the fire, wrapping her arms around herself as if looking for warmth. "He said he wouldn't hang for taking some spoiled rich girl." Morrison traded looks with his men. "How very wise of him, though I'm afraid his army record shows he's more scared than wise. You know about his past. I make it my business to know everything about people who mess with my wants." Morrison moved closer, his shadow falling across Eleanor's face. "Silas Kane is a runner and a bad. The fact that he left you when danger came just shows his kind." Eleanor made herself to look up at him with what she hoped looked like thanks and relief. "I don't know what I was thinking running away like that. I must have been out of my mind to think I could live on my own. Short mad brought on by before wedding nerves," Morrison said smooth. "Totally get. Many young ladies feel similar bits. When faced with the idea of marriage, I guess I was scared by the duty, by the idea of being a right wife to such a key guy." Morrison's chest got big with happy. "Natural enough. But I'm a wait guy, Eleanor. I get that you'll need time to get better from your bad time before we can go on with our wedding plans." "Wedding plans?" Eleanor put just the right note of mixed up into her voice. "But surely after what's happened, after I've been alone in the wild with a guy for weeks, my dear girl," Morrison cut in, his tone like talking to a kid. "You were taken by a dangerous bad. Whatever bad you may have had were hardly your fault. People will get that you were a hurt, not a willing one." Eleanor felt sick at how easily he pushed away her pick, how fully he was ready to rewrite her story to fit his needs. "People will talk. People always talk. But they'll talk about how lucky you were to have a loving guy to marry who never gave up looking for you. About how I risked my own safety to save you from a bad guy." Morrison's smile was cold as winter moonlight. "The wedding will happen as soon as you've got back your health and mood. A happy end to a scary trip. And if I say no?" Morrison's mask slipped a bit, showing the hard under his nice charm. "Say no? My dear Eleanor, I'm afraid you're in no spot to say no to anything." "Your good name depends fully on the story we pick to tell about your gone." Jake moved not comfy by the fire. "Mr. Morrison, maybe we should talk this somewhere more alone." "Silly, Miss Whitmore needs to get her spot fully." Morrison turned back to Eleanor, his voice getting hard. "You see, my dear, there are only two possible ways of recent stuff. In the first way, you were taken by a bad loner who held you against your will until I bravely saved you. In that way, you're a hurt who deserves sorry and a rich husband willing to look past your bad time." Eleanor waited, knowing what was coming. "In the second way," Morrison went on, "you ran away on your own, Tall of Bad, with a shamed soldier. In that way, you're a bad woman who picked bad over duty. No good guy would have you, and your dad would be forced to cut you off to keep the family name." "Those aren't the only possible ways," Eleanor said quietly. Morrison laughed. "Oh, and what other way do you say?" Eleanor stood slowly, the firelight catching the hard in her green eyes. "The way where I picked freedom over a marriage to a guy who sees women as things to be bought and sold. That way," Morrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "ends with you in a poor's grave and Silas Kane hanging from the nearest tree for taking and bad." The word hung in the air like a real hit. Eleanor felt her mom's locket warm against her skin, reminding her of times of women who'd faced down bad guys with nothing but bravery and sure. "You would lie about that?" she asked, her voice steady despite the mad building in her chest. "I would tell whatever story best serves fair and people order." Morrison stepped closer, his tall body over her. "You belong to him, Eleanor. Your dad's debts make sure that you can come to that getting on your own, or I can help you reach it through. Other ways? What other ways?" Morrison's smile turned hunter-like. "Well, if Kane were to fight arrest for taking, bad things do happen. Mountain fare tends to be fast and final. And if you were found in a bad way, well, Marriage to me would be your only hope of save. Eleanor finally got the full size of his plan. Morrison wasn't just planning to force her into marriage. He was ready to make proof of hurt to make sure her yes. The truth of what had happened between her and Silas would be no matter. People would believe whatever story Morrison picked to tell. "You're talking about kill," she said flat. "I'm talking about fair for a bad who hurt a clean young woman." Morrison reached out to touch her cheek, and Eleanor had to fight not to pull back. "Don't worry, my dear. After we're married, this bad bit will be forgotten. You'll learn to like the safety and good I can give. And if I can't learn to like it," Morrison's fingers tightened a bit against her skin, "then I'll have to help you learn. I'm very good at teaching lessons to those who need help." The threat was clear, and Eleanor felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. This guy didn't just want to control her. He was ready to break her if she fought. He saw her not as a person with her own will and wants, but as a thing to be got and shaped to his likes. "I see," she said softly. "I'm glad you're starting to get—" Morrison stepped back, his sureness back. "Now shall we talk the sets for your go back to nice life? I've brought a right dress for you to wear, and we'll need to make a good story about your save." Eleanor looked around the camp spot, noting the spots of Morrison's men, the place of their weapons, the various escape ways through the woods. Everything was just as she and Silashad planned. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying a new note of hard, "I think there's something you need to get first." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Oh." Eleanor smiled, and for the first time all evening it was fully real. "I'm not the same scared girl who ran away from your engagement party. The mountains have a way of teaching people who they really are." And with that, she reached for her knife. Eleanor's hand never got to her knife. The sharp crack of a rifle split the mountain air, and one of Morrison's men fell to the ground, holding his shoulder. The shot came from the dark beyond the firelight, careful and controlled, a warning rather than a kill. "Nobody move," came Silas's voice from the woods. "Next shot won't be aimed to hurt." Morrison turned toward the sound, his hand moving fast toward his gun. "Kane, I should have known you wouldn't leave your prize so easy." "Let the lady step away from the fire," Silas called back. "Then we'll talk." "I don't think so." Morrison's arms went around Eleanor's waist, pulling her against him as his gun came out. "Seems to me I hold the plus here." Eleanor felt the cold metal of Morrison's gun against her head. But instead of fear, she felt a strange calm come over her. This was the moment they'd got ready for. The moment when Morrison's true kind would be hard to say no. "Careful, Kane," Morrison yelled. "Your little bird might get hurt if you do anything silly." Jake, the not-hurt member of Morrison's group, had taken cover behind a fallen log. His rifle pointed at the dark where Silas stayed hidden. The hurt man moaned and rolled behind the fire, holding his shoulder, but still awake. "Let her go, Morrison." Silas's voice came from a different spot. Now he was moving, making himself a hard target. "Your fight is with me." "My fight is with both of you!" Morrison snapped, his arm tightening around Eleanor's ribs. "You for taking my girl to marry, and her for being dumb enough to throw her life away on a worn-down soldier." Eleanor felt Morrison's pulse fast where his arm pressed against her back. For all his big talk, he was scared. Guys like Morrison were dangerous when stuck, but they were also likely mistakes. "Tell him, Eleanor," Morrison hissed in her ear. "Tell him you're coming back with me on your own. Tell him this has all been a mix-up." Instead, Eleanor raised her voice so it would carry clearly through the woods. "Silas, he's been lying about everything. He said he plans to kill you and force me into marriage by saying you hurt me." Morrison's hold tightened hard. "Shut up, you dumb girl. He threatened to hurt me if I don't obey him. He said he's good at teaching lessons to people who need help." I said, "Shut up." Morrison pressed the gun harder against her head. But the bad was done. Jake had heard every word, and even in the moving firelight, Eleanor could see the not easy on his face. Whatever Morrison had told his men about this job, it clearly hadn't included plans for kill and forced marriage. "Mr. Morrison?" Jake called, not sure. "Maybe we should. Maybe you should keep your mouth shut and do what I'm paying you for." Morrison growled. Another rifle shot cracked through the night, and Jake's hat flew off his head. The message was clear. Silas could have killed him just as easy as he'd cut his head. "Jesus," Jake said low, ducking lower behind his log. "He could pick us off one by one from out there." "Not while I have his woman," Morrison said. But his voice lacked its earlier sureness. Eleanor felt the moment on a knife edge. Morrison was getting more bad, more dangerous. Soon he might decide that a dead hold was better than no hold at all. "Bartholomew," she said softly, using his first name on purpose. You don't have to do this. You could let me go right now. Tell people you never found us. Let you go. Morrison's laugh was hard with no belief. After everything I've put in this setup, after the money I've spent, the plans I've made. What money? What plans? Your dad owes me over $50,000, Morrison hissed. Borrowed against his train deals, used my credit to get gov help. When the Indian troubles messed his build time, he couldn't make his pays. Eleanor felt pieces of a puzzle click in place. So, you offered to forgive the debt in trade for my hand. More than that, I offered to make him a team in my mining work, give him a chance to rebuild his money. All he had to do was give one spoiled daughter to the church, and if he couldn't give me, Morrison's hold shifted, and Eleanor felt the gun move away from her head for just a moment. Then he loses everything. The train, the ranch, his spot in people. He becomes just another broken guy who bet everything and lost. You're talking about breaking my family. I'm talking about getting what's owed to me. Your dad made his pick when he signed those papers. You're just the money he's paying his debts with. Eleanor's mom's locket seemed to burn against her skin. Catherine Whitmore had been sold into marriage to pay her own dad's debts, stuck in a life she'd never picked, but made the best of through quiet strength and stubborn nice. Now Morrison wanted Eleanor to follow the same path, to give up her freedom for her family's money safe. But Eleanor wasn't her mom. She'd learned to fight for what she wanted, learned to value her own picks over other people's wants. No, she said clearly. No what? No, I won't be used as money. No, I won't marry you to pay my dad's debts. And no, I won't let you hurt the guy I love. Morrison's arm tightened around her waist. You don't have a pick in the matter. Everyone has a pick, Eleanor said, and in one smooth move. She drove her elbow back into Morrison's ribs while grabbing his gun hand and forcing it up. The gun shot harmless into the night sky as Morrison bent over, gasping. Eleanor twisted away from him, but his free hand caught her wrist, pulling her back toward him with enough force to send them both falling to the ground. They rolled in the dirt beside the fire, Morrison trying to get control of his weapon, while Eleanor fought with the bad strength of someone who had everything to lose. His bigger size and weight gave him the plus, but Eleanor had learned to fight dirty in the months since leaving her dad's house. She scratched her nails across his face, drew blood with her teeth when he tried to cover her mouth, and drove her knee toward his middle with all the force she could get. Morrison said bad and hit her across the face with his free hand, splitting her lip and sending stars across her sight. Enough, he growled, finally managing to pin her under him, the gun once again pressed against her throat. You want to play games? Fine, we'll play games. But as he spoke, Eleanor heard the soft whistle of an arrow cutting through air. Morrison's eyes went wide with shock and pain as the shaft came from his shoulder, spinning him away from Eleanor and sending his gun sliding across the dirt. Silas came from the dark like a payback ghost, a bow in his hands and kill in his eyes. Get away from her. Morrison held at the arrow in his shoulder, his face twisted with mad and no believe. You shot me. You really shot me. That was a warning, Silas said, putting another arrow. The next one goes through your heart. Jake, still crouched behind his log, called out, not sure. Mr. Morrison, I think maybe we should. His words were cut off by the sound of coming horses. Lots of horses coming up the trail fast. Eleanor felt her heart drop, thinking Morrison had brought more men than they'd known. But the voice that rang out across the open brought a wave of hope instead of no hope. This is Sheriff Davidson. Everyone, drop your weapons and step into the light. Eleanor got to her feet, wiping blood from her split lip. Sheriff Davidson was an honest guy, one of the few law guys in the area who couldn't be bought or scared. If he was here, it meant someone had finally told the truth about what was going on. 6 men on horses rode into the firelight, led by Davidson himself, an old vet with iron-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Behind him rode Charles Whitmore, looking older and more worn than Eleanor had ever seen him. Father, Eleanor called out, mixed up. Charles got down from his horse and hurried toward her, his face a mix of relief and hurt. Eleanor, thank God you're alive. When Martha told me what really happened, Martha? Eleanor looked between her dad and the sheriff. But Morrison said she'd told on us. Morrison threatened my grandkids, came a known voice from behind the sheriff's men. Martha herself rode into the open, her rough face set with sureness. Said he'd hurt them if I didn't tell him where you'd gone. Eleanor's eyes got wet. So you did tell him? I told him you'd gone to stay with your aunt in Boston, Martha said strong. Sent him chasing trains and wire lines while I came to find your dad and tell him the truth about what kind of guy his daughter was supposed to marry." Sheriff Davidson looked at the scene. Morrison holding an arrow in his shoulder, his hurtman groaning by the fire, Jake still crouched with his rifle, and Silas standing guard over Eleanor. "Bartholomew Morrison," Davidson said, official. "You're under arrest for taking bad-asking and plan to do fake." "This is silly." Morrison fought to his feet, swaying a bit. "I'm the hurt here. These people attacked me after you held a gun to my daughter's head," Charles said quietly. "After you said to planning her kill if she wouldn't help with your plans." Eleanor stared at her dad in shock. "You heard all that? We've been listening from the trees for the past 10 minutes, Davidson explained. "Your friend Kane here has quite a voice when he needs it." Made sure his voice carried far enough for C. Eleanor looked at Silas, flooding through her the shots, the yelled threats, the big fight. All of it had been made to draw out Morrison's true wants in front of See Who Could Tell to his guilt. Morrison's face went white as Haig at the trap he'd walked into. "You can't prove anything." "It's my word against mine," Charles cut in, "and Sheriff Davidson's and 5 other men who heard you threaten my daughter's life. Not to say," Davidson added, "the written telling we got from Martha Henderson about your threats against her family. Turns out, threatening clean kids to get news is also against the law." Morrison looked around like a stuck animal, seeing his plans falling around him. Your men are going to tell against you in trade for easy or bad," Davidson said straight. "Jake's already agreed to tell us everything about your plans to force Miss Whitmore into marriage through bad ask and scare." Eleanor's felt a deep sense of relief wash over her. It was over. Morrison's lies had been shown, his threats stopped, his power broken. But as she moved toward Silas, Morrison made one last bad play. With his good arm, he jumped for his Fallon gun. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the doorway of the little church in Millfield, Colorado, watching the afternoon sun come through simple glass windows onto rough wooden seats. The building was nothing like the big church where her dad had first planned for her to marry Bartholomew Morrison. This church was smaller, simpler, and way more true, much like the life she'd picked for herself. Her wedding dress was simple white cotton, sewn by her own hands with skills Martha had taught her during the long winter months. No brought silk or fancy lace, no long part that needed 3 helpers to handle. Just clean lines, useful buttons, and stitched wild flowers around the neck, mountain asters and Indian paintbrush. Columbines and larkspur, all the pretty things that grew wild and free in the highland. At her throat, her mom's locket caught the light. Inside the soft gold oval, she'd put a tiny pressed flower, the first mountain aster she'd got in Silas's book. A reminder of the moment she'd started to get what freedom really meant. "Ready?" asked Martha, who'd said she must serve as Eleanor's helper despite her own old years. Eleanor touched the pair of simple gold wedding bands tucked into her flowers, rings that Bill Morrison, the local metal worker, had made himself as a wedding gift, not because he'd been paid to, but because he'd wanted to add something pretty to a love story that had given the whole area something to believe in. "More than ready," Eleanor replied, and meant it. The small group that had come included faces she'd come to know and like over the past months. Doc Peterson, who fixed Morrison's arrow hurt before the guy was taken to Denver to stand trial. Mrs. Henderson from the store, whose kind eyes had always held sorry for young women stuck by stuff beyond their control. Jake Morrison, no family to Bartholomew despite the same name, who told against his old boss and now worked as a ranch hand for Eleanor's dad. And there at the front of the church stood Silas. Eleanor's breath caught as she saw him waiting for her. He cut his beard and hair for the time, and wore a simple black suit that showed his wide shoulders and made his dark eyes seem even deeper. But it was the look on his face that made her heart race. A look of wonder and thanks, as if he couldn't quite believe that this pretty moment was real. Beside him stood Charles Whitmore, who'd asked for the honor of running the event. Eleanor's dad had spent the winter months rebuilding both his train business and his tie with his daughter. The money mess around Morrison's arrest had actually helped Charles in the long run when the truth came out about the bad ask ways. Many other business guys had come out with like stories, and people sorry had swung strong for Morrison's hurt. More key, Charles had finally started to get that his daughter's happy might be worth more than any business deal he could make. As Eleanor walked down the walkway, she thought about Morrison's trial, which had been big in paper heads across Colorado for weeks. The guy who'd seemed so strong and not touch had proven surprisingly weak when taken of his money and people spot. Faced with lots of proof of his bad ask, plan, try taking, and threats of bad, he'd finally said guilty to less charges in trade for a 20-year jail time, more good than his bad, though was what had happened to his hurt. The other business guys he'd bad-assed had joined together, making a team that now controlled much of the area's mining and train wants. Charles Whitmore had come out as one of the leaders of this group, his good name better rather than hurt by his ready to put his daughter's good above his own money wants. As Eleanor got to the front of the church, Silas stepped forward to take her hand, his rough fingers mixed with hers, and she felt the same sense of right that had kept her through all the hard months of building their new life together. "Dear loved," Charles started, his voice carrying clearly through the small church. "We are here today to see the join of two souls who have found in each other the bravery to pick love over fear, hope over no hope, and freedom over easy." Eleanor smiled, knowing her dad's try to make words that honored what she and Silas had been through together. During the long winter months at the cabin, Charles had come often, slowly coming to get that his daughter's happy lay not in people rooms, but in the simple beats of mountain life. He'd watched Eleanor teach reading to the kids of local miners and ranch hands, using skills he'd never thought to like. He'd seen Silas's patient making as he carved toys for those same kids, pretty things made with love rather than for money. And he'd seen the quiet happy that came from both of them when they worked together, building a life based on same respect and shared dreams. "Silas," Charles went on, "do you take Eleanor to be your wife, to love and like, to help her dreams and respect her picks in sick and in health? For as long as you both shall live." "I do," Silas said, his voice steady and sure with all my heart. "Eleanor, do you take Silas to be your husband, to love and like, to help his dreams and respect his picks in sick and in health for as long as you both shall live?" Eleanor looked into Silas's eyes and saw shown there all the things that had brought them to this moment. Bravery in the face of danger, healing from old hurts, the patient building of trust and close. But most of all, she saw love, pure, true, and free-picked. "I do," she said, her voice ringing with sureness. They traded the simple gold bands, each ring a perfect circle, showing the full they'd found in each other. As Silas slipped the wedding band onto Eleanor's finger, she remembered the first time she'd seen his hands, marked and strong, able of both bad and amazing soft. Now those same hands would be her team in building a future neither of them could have thought alone. "By the power given to me by Theoria of Colorado," Charles said, his voice thick with feeling, "I now say you husband and wife. Silas, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was gentle and full of promise, seen by friends who'd watched their love story happen against the back of the Colorado mountains. When they broke apart, Eleanor saw tears in Martha's eyes and smiles on faces through Thesmol Group. But it was the look on her dad's face that moved her most. A mix of pride, relief, and real happy for the daughter who'd finally found her spot in the world. The party was held in the church's small meat hall, with food given by every family in the valley. Eleanor had never tasted anything yummier than the simple feast made with love by people who'd come to see her and Silas's family, rather than strangers. As the evening went on and the fun kept around them, Eleanor and Silas slipped away to sit on the church's front steps, watching the sun set behind the known peaks that had become their home. "Any sorry?" Silas asked softly, his arm around her shoulders. Eleanor thought about the question for real. A year ago, she'd been the cared-for daughter of a rich train guy, expected to marry for plus and live a life of comfy same. Now she was the wife of a mountain guy, facing a future that would likely include hard work, not sure money, and tests she couldn't yet think. "No Tone," she said strong, "you." Silas was quiet for a moment, and Eleanor knew he was thinking about Sarah and Emma, the family he'd lost so many years ago. The guilt and sad would always be part of him, but they no longer said who he was. Love had a way of making room for the past, while still building toward the future. "I used to think," he said finally, "that I'd used up my share of happy in this life, that what happened to my first family was bad for the things I'd done in the war. And I didn't deserve a second chance." Eleanor nestled closer to his warmth, getting the weight of what he was sharing. "But loving you has taught me something key," Silas went on. Happy isn't something you earn or deserve. It's something you pick to take when it's given, and something you pick to build when you find the right person to build it with. Eleanor felt tears in her eyes at the easy whys of his words. And have you picked to take it? Silas turned to look at her, his dark eyes showing the last light of the mountain sunset. Every day for the rest of my life, as if called by their happy, a shooting star went across the darkening sky, a bright line of hope against the big dark Eleanor Medea wish, though she knew she already had everything she'd ever really wanted. Later, as they rode back toward their cabin in the mountains, Eleanor thought about the trip that had brought them to this moment. It had started with her bad flight from an unwanted marriage, kept through weeks of learning to live in the wild, and ended in a love story that had got the think of everyone who'd seen it. But more than that, it was a story about the bravery to pick your own path, even when that path led through danger and not sure. It was about learning that freedom wasn't just no rules, but having choice. And it was about finding that love, when free given and got, could heal even the deepest hurts. The cabin that waited them was the same build where Eleanor had first learned to tend a fire, and Silas had first dared to hope again. But now it was truly their home, filled with shared memories and dreams for the future. The root spot had been made bigger, the roof made strong for mountain winters, and a new room added for the kids they both hoped would come in time. And on the mantel sat Silas's fixed compass, its needle once again pointing true north. Beside it rested Eleanor's collection of pressed flowers, now bound in a right book with pages and pages of mountain memories. And on the walls hung examples of their shared craft, carved flowers and woods creatures, each piece a proof to the pretty that could grow from patient hands and loving hearts. As they settled into their marriage bed for the first time, Eleanor felt a deep sense of full. Not because she was now someone's wife, but because she had finally fully become herself. The scared girl who'd run from her dad's house had changed into a woman who knew her own mind and trusted her own strength. "I love you," she whispered into the dark, the words carrying all the weight of everything they'd been through together. "And I love you," Silas whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that." Outside their window, the mountains stood forever and no change, holding their small human happy in the palm of an old hand. And somewhere in the far, an owl called to its mate, a sound that no longer spoke of being alone, but of the wild. Free love that could bloom in the most surprise spots when two souls were brave enough to reach for it. The rich girl had indeed gone, just as the papers had said, but in her place had come something way more good. A woman who'd learned that the greatest treasure was the freedom topic, love over duty, hope over fear, and the bravery to build a life worth living on her own way.